I knew I would have a mental game to play in this, and people had talked about it, and then I experienced like, oh, this is what they're talking about.
Hi, I'm Russ.
And I'm Danny.
And this is the Memory Makers Podcast.
The show focused on helping you create amazing customer experiences and make more memories.
Memory Makers! I wanted to go with like 80s action toy jingle today.
Like G.I. Joe?
Yeah. Miss Kim, you are in the building today.
I am.
How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm super excited. I feel like I get to hang out with my good friends.
Yeah.
And I get to be on my very first podcast.
Yeah.
So it's kind of it's a fun day.
I love it.
Yeah, I'm super excited to share with everybody.
Well, we're excited as well. So today's episode are going to be life lessons from climbing a mountain. And as many of you who have listened to previous episodes have heard, Danny and Kim both took on this monumental task of climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, and it was too ripe with opportunity for us to not dive in and see what some of the transformative lessons and hardships and all of that stuff that went along with it. So I'm super excited. Danny, you ready to jump on in, son?
Always.
Let's do it. Okay, so Kim, my first question is going to be for you.
Okay.
Why the hell did you do it?
That's a good question. I know a lot of people, the first thing they say to me when they ask like, oh, is this a bucket list item? Like, why the heck would you choose to climb a 19,384 feet freestanding mountain in the middle of Africa?
Yeah.
Well, not middle, but you know what I'm saying. Anyway, so I really love the story behind my why of climbing it. Is more of a story of inspiration and has to do with the word story.
Mm-hmm.
So we get to work with amazing clients. As you know, you've met several of them, and one of them is Kalahari Resorts.
Mm-hmm.
There's a big water park resort. They've got, I think, 4 locations across the country, and they're building a 5th. Mm-hmm. Super top notch, and they're super fun clients. So I got to go on a site visit. I think it was in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And we met with another partner that we work with alongside of to help with attractions. And so we were looking at options and played some of their attractions, looked at the site. It was in the Poconos. Mm-hmm. And the meeting went long, dinner went long, and we needed a place to stay that night because we had stayed a lot longer than we had thought to. So they were generous enough to give us a room at the resort. And, when you ever stay at a hotel, they have the TV station or channel for that hotel or resort, right?
Right.
And so just with the announcements and all that, well, this
Mario
was...
Lopez.
Yeah, absolutely. A little extra.
Yeah.
But they had a kind of a cool element that they added into it every once in a while of these personalized videos of the Nelson family. So Todd Nelson is the founder and owner of Kalahari Resorts. Okay. And so they showed their adventures in Africa, because they've got this really deep-seated passion for Africa and wanting to bring some of that into the resort, which they do a phenomenal job of in all of the theming and those extra pieces and such. So anyway, one of the episodes that I watched was them climbing Kilimanjaro. Mm. And they did an amazing job of telling that story of climbing together. And I was super inspired by it. Like, I think we could post the video if we wanted to on the show notes or whatever, you know. But it was super inspiring, and I just thought to myself, I think I'd like to do that someday.
Yeah.
It was just a little seed that was planted, and sure enough, that came to fruition. Let's see, 6 years later.
Yeah.
So. The power of story is so important. One, just in giving space for you to share your story, and and then also making space to listen to other people's story. I know that was a big deal for Jeff. Jeff Schilling was my late husband and also the founder of Creative Works, and he was really big into that, especially at the end of his life, about your story matters.
Yeah.
And it's important to do that because you make personal connection with people, which then just deepens your life. And so that story component, I feel like as a business owner, is super important. I mean, even this podcast alone, we're sharing stories with other operators. I love the one with Jeff at Atomic.
Oh yeah,
You know, that
Jeff
was
Pierce
yeah,
was
Jeff
so
Pearson
great.
was so great. I loved hearing, you know, some of his story and his background of what motivated them and such. And so I think that there's a lot of inspiration, which was, you know, the reason behind me sharing this was, you know, the Nelson family inspired me. So story can inspire, story can also encourage.
Yeah.
You know, and it can also teach lessons. So like you don't have to, you can learn from other people as well. And then most importantly, you make connections with your employees, team members, customers. Listen to their stories. You share your story, maybe why you started the business, why you get into this, because they make that personal connection. Even with just one, in different ways of different stories, we all make connections with each other.
Yeah. So then it was an inspiring story of, gosh, that would be really great to do one day. But so many people have that kind of, oh, well, I should do that one day. That would be really great. Like, what then took that inspiration and pushed it over the edge of, we are doing this thing?
Well, I had attended a leadership event, and they had us do an exercise where we wrote our future biography or future bio. And they're like, think ahead in 10 years and write that as to what you'd want to say you'd accomplished in that 10 years.
Right on.
And it's one of those, like, they play the music that's super inspiring, and you just get into that flow state, and, you know, you just start writing. And that came out of me. And I wrote, I wanted to climb and summit Mount Kilimanjaro. And I was a little bit of a surprise to me, because it's not like I talk about Kilimanjaro. Well, I talk about Kilimanjaro a lot now, but I didn't back then. And so it came out of me. And then I took action on it, like literally 2 weeks later, because I talked to Danny and Danny's wife, Michelle. And actually it was Michelle who I just spoke with first.
Yeah.
And they had just returned from a trip to Africa. So I knew that they would be good candidates to join me. And so I asked Michelle, and she did not even hesitate or ask Danny. She just said, we're doing it.
Those of you who have not had the pleasure of meeting Michelle, she may be one of the most badass women on the planet. Absolutely.
You're
and
not
she
wrong.
is always game to get after it for sure. So
I will
Danny,
say
go ahead.
What's interesting is, you know, Kim's portion of the story and where the seed came from and how that turned into a catalyst to go on the trip. And then people ask me why I went, and I say, oh, because someone asked me. I went, yeah. But I think that the cool thing there is that both Michelle and I, my wife, we've set up our life to be able to be a lifestyle of yes, to say yes to the things that we want to do and yes to the things that we love. And so when this opportunity came up from Kim, it was an immediate yes. She said yes for me, and then I absolutely agreed with her. But I think that translates to business as well. How can you set up your business and your revenue and your profitability in a way that you can say yes to the things you want to say yes to, whether that's charitable contributions or community engagement or new experiences that you want to add? There's a lot of lessons, and I'm going to do my best to tie my personal lessons back to businesses as well.
Well, I think that we've all, especially since you guys have come back, the kind of, you know, whether it's thought exercises that we're doing in our meetings before we kick things off and get into the nuts and bolts of what that piece is, just having from both of you guys the reflective takeaways have been fantastic. So I'm excited for us to share that as we go. So Danny, let me hit you up with one. You're not really known as a planner, you know, in the traditional sense. And for those of you who
insert sarcasm.
Yes, exactly. So and you and Michelle live out in Colorado, you guys climb, you're active, you do a lot of that stuff. When you decided and jumped in onto this to say yes, and you guys started down the preparation for this trip, what went into that preparation for you? And did you have to kind of rethink or retool assumptions that you maybe had going into an experience like this to, you know, take it up to a new level for you know, because you guys would do 14,000 foot, you know, kind of hikes and things out there in the Rockies, but this is a step up. It's one of the tallest peaks in the entire world. So the tallest one in Africa on an entire continent. So What, as you were doing preparation, what did that look like? And what were some of the, kind of what if abouts, to quote Jason Barnaby, some of the head trash that maybe you had to work through as you were putting together the plan for this?
Well, so what's interesting is that, yeah, we live in Colorado. We've had the experience to be able to go up to 12, 13, 14,000 feet to hike, which was great because we were able to acclimate ourselves to that level of elevation. But it's very different to do a single day hike out and back, come back home and sleep in our own house and our own bed and all that stuff. It's Kilimanjaro, it's 7 days of sleeping in a tent. But one of the things as far as the preparation goes, we were doing a lot of research online. We were watching videos, we were reading articles, we were checking out blog posts, trying to understand, because this is a big trip and for us it was a big deal, and we wanted to make sure we were as prepared as possible. So we did a lot of that research. But there was something that I noticed for myself as I was doing it. I was setting expectations for how my trip should be based upon what I was seeing in those videos. I was already comparing my trip that hadn't even happened yet to the trips that I saw online. I was thinking things like, well, I hope we don't get rain like them, or oh, I bet we'll get awesome sunrises like this, or I hope we connect with our guides the way they did. And my trip hadn't even started, but I was already setting this baseline expectation for what it should be. But in the moment I realized that, I stopped doing that extra research because I realized that wasn't going to be helpful for me. Instead, I don't have any control over what the weather's going to be, what the sunrises are going to be like, who my guides are going to be, what their personalities are. And so instead of trying to set expectations of my trip so high that the only thing that could possibly happen is be let down because they don't meet them, I decided to say, I'm going to let the trip be what it is and experience it. I was still prepared and I had all the information that I needed, but I had gone too far down that rabbit hole. And I think that this is applicable in business and life. How often do we look at other people and their successes and their business and say to ourselves, oh, well, mine should be like that. Why can't I do what they're doing? And that's a dangerous path to go down. Of course, we want to learn from others and what they do well and what they've succeeded at and where they've fallen short. But if we compare ourselves to them, comparison is the thief of joy.
That's good. I like that quite a bit. Did you, as you were looking at all of the gear, I'm sure you guys had more trips to like REI and all of the things as you guys were doing all of that. I'm sure both of you.
They got a lot of my money, yes. That is true.
That's good. Well, it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. You do get a little
cash back kind of rebate bonus at the end of the year with REI. So
nice.
I'm super, I've already gotten one check and I'll probably get one at the end of this year too.
Right on. Yeah. Okay. Well, we like that.
Plug for REI.
Yeah. So Kim, talk to me a little bit. So we get on the plane, we're going over there and we're, you're excited and you're built up. Talk to me about who was in the group with you guys. I mean, it wasn't just the three of you going, oh, we're going to climb a mountain. Like
right.
It's an infrastructure and there's a whole thing that goes with it. So talk to me a little bit about who you had in your group and the people that you met as you were doing this.
No, it's amazing until you, obviously with anything in life, you don't really understand and learn about it till you actually do it. And so in our research, we learned first that you are unable to even enter Kilimanjaro National Park without a local professional guide. It's illegal to even enter. So that's first. Second, it literally takes a village to get you up that mountain. So we had one other member of our team. So there's the four of us that were climbing, that were quote unquote climbers that kind of paid to, hey, this is the adventure that we want to go on. So we had, and everyone's like so shocked by this, but when you think about, we were living on the mountain for 7 days. We had 18 support people for us.
Dang.
Yes. For the four of us. So just think of other groups that are larger, their support teams are even larger.
Right.
So two of the members of that team were integral. Our guide, Abu was his name, and he had climbed and summited Kilimanjaro. He thought probably at least 150 times.
Wow.
So he's definitely an expert
and
very
that
trustworthy.
Guy not on like all of the podcasts? Like, jeez, that's awesome.
He was in great shape, and I always felt like we were holding him back. He kind of let us go at a what they call pole, slowly. It's a marathon, not a sprint. But and then we had an assistant guide, Lulu, and they'd kind of take turns. One was in the front, one was in the back, and they were kind of our info people, sharing about the ecosystem that we were in, the plants that were around us, maybe even telling us like, hey, step here to here. In certain areas that were either muddy or super steep.
Okay.
And every night we would gather and they would tell us, okay, this is what tomorrow's going to look like. This is how far we're going to go. This is probably how you should dress or what you should pack. This is the time that you need to be up. And this is the time that we're going to leave. So they're kind of our info guide, as well as they watched over us because they took our pulse ox every night, every morning, all that, just to make sure that we were healthy and safe to go up there. But I was just reminded of how important it is to have experts in your camp to do things. I know as entrepreneurs, we're all just like, oh, I can figure it out. I can do it myself. I don't. And I think there's some of that when you're first starting out, and even as you're growing your business, you've just got to dig in and learn it yourself.
Right.
But there's a certain level that sometimes you get to where you're just like, this is past the level that I should or need to understand. I need to get an expert involved. Or I need to implement a software that makes this easier.
Right.
Or I need to go to a training and get this. So investing that time into an expert's help. And I didn't even mention the 16 other people that were there. I mean, that's a huge amount. We had a cook, a waiter, a guy that set up our little portable toilet, which I'm so glad we had that.
Otherwise, you'd have to be learning about which plants you can use and which plants you cannot use.
Absolutely. And then we also, all the porters. I know a lot of people are like, are there Sherpas there? And like, we call them porters. And they carried our tents. They carried our big old duffels, which there was a limit to the weight and everything, but they carried those. A lot of them would put them on their head, sometimes on their back. Plus, they had their own pack of stuff. They didn't have a lot of stuff because a lot of times they just wore the same thing every day. They did not wear nice boots like we had. I mean, they were definitely going it in the very inexpensive way to do it.
Sure.
And they carried all that stuff, and they would literally just whiz by us on those trails because they're literally tearing down the camp that you were at after you leave to start the hike, and then they go past us, and then they're at the next campsite and they set it up, and it's all done before we even would get there.
Well, it's almost, when you guys were explaining that portion to me, it blew my mind. One, just the amount of infrastructure and support team and experts that you have to have in order to take on something like this. But then when you were, talking about how the rest of that, they would just be passing by you guys. They were not going pole. They were not going slowly.
No, they don't need to do that.
And in that capacity where it is an extremely difficult task of what you guys are doing in and of itself. And then for them to have and do all of that and then some, it's almost like when you get into martial arts and things and you realize, oh, I've got my black belt. And it's like, well, there are degrees to your black belt even. Okay. And so, getting into that, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth degree, kind of levels and things, it's, I'm sure inspiring, but also a little bit like, you got to be kidding me.
It was both of those things. I know I can't imagine if we were able to measure their cardiovascular health, I feel like it would be off the charts just because they're dealing with altitude and just going up there. And it's like they're just taking a stroll. They're not even struggling really. I mean, they're sweating.
Sure.
Based on whatever the temp was, but they just made it look super easy, and I was at moments struggle bussing with just my little day pack.
Well, it's good, and to see, when we talk about even things like you're the average of the 5 people that you spend the most of your time with, like it good to be able to have that of, okay, I can do this. Like I'm, they're doing this and that, and like I can also take this on. Danny, talk to me a little bit about what the typical day looked like for you guys as you were hiking up that mountain, and what were you doing? Were you trying to be present? Were you listening to audiobooks or music to, as you were going through portions of the grind? Like, what did that look like for you?
So each day we'd have our schedule in the morning of when to wake up and when we're going to get coffee and tea, we're going to have breakfast, and when we're going to get on the trail. And then once we started, each day, depending on what it was and how far we had to go, it was anywhere from 4 to 7 hours of hiking in a day. And most of it was hiking in silence, because for a couple reasons. One, we're very often in a single file line, and that's hard to have a conversation with another person hiking in a single file line. And two, because the air gets so thin as you go up in altitude and elevation, that you don't really want to spend a lot of your breath talking to other people. So I decided not to listen to audiobooks or music or do any of that stuff. One of the intentions that I had for the trip was to be very, very present. And the fact that I didn't have data on the mountain, I didn't have texting and social media, emails, messages, news, any of that stuff, it was a good chance for me to kind of give myself a mental reset. And so for me, it was really important to be present in the moment. And I found the hiking to be almost like a meditation, where if anyone who meditates or has attempted to meditate, the first few minutes when you sit down or more, you're uncomfortable, your back itches, you're trying to find your positioning, you're fidgety. It's just, you're not in the flow at all. It takes you some time to really kind of get comfortable and find a flow and get in the zone. The same thing happened every day when we would get on the trail, and I would find myself, as I started hiking, I'm like, my pack's not sitting right, and I'm a little uncomfortable. My mind's bouncing all over the place. But then as I found a rhythm in the hiking and the movement, I was able to really get into flow states and find that rhythm. And for me, the lessons that came out of that is it was, that reset was so important, because it was a reminder that I don't need constant inputs all the time. It's okay to be bored. And it also taught me that starting is the hardest part, and just getting going and getting into the flow. But I think this is an important reminder for anybody, whether they're a business owner or not, that we're constantly have the availability of our cell phone right in our pocket. And the moment we have a second of downtime, we're pulling that out, we're checking news, we're looking at social media, looking at the emails, which is good to be productive and stay on top of things. Also, we need to give ourselves and our brains time to rest and be. And the more that we do that, the more that we'll be able to come back with more energy to do the work, the better that we'll be able to have creative problem-solving ideas, because while we're letting our brains rest, it allows our brain and our synapses to start making connections that we otherwise can't, and that's where our best ideas come from. That's why people say, oh, I had this shower thought. Well, you have a shower thought because you don't have any other inputs, and your brain is just, you're kind of on autopilot doing that, or mowing the lawn, or whatever it is. It allows your brain that time to come up with all these creative ideas. And I think all of us need more of that in our lives, in a time when we're always on and we're always available and we always have inputs.
Yeah, I have to just add to you as a little shout out to Danny. He and Michelle were really great about, we set kind of the tone for the whole trip, where we made a decision as a group, the four of us, that we were just going to stay present for that day, because we were all kind of in the back of our minds thinking of the big summit day, and what about this, and worrying about that, and talking about that, and obsessing, almost like letting our brains move fast forward to that day when we were maybe on day one or day two. And so if any of us even kind of hinted at that, one of us would stop, and Danny was the best at it. You're like, nope, that's not today. Let's be present. Let's just be where we're at right now. And that was a really good lesson too for me, where it's easy to, borrow trouble when you're thinking about the future and or when you're looking in the rearview mirror, but it's just like, no, let's just be here, be present.
Well, it's such a discipline that you have to exercise and trying to do that, and catching yourself and giving yourself grace as you start to do those things, so that way it doesn't become head trash for you as well. So,
yes.
So Kim, you mentioned Summit Day and not trying to think ahead to that too quickly. Talk to me a little bit about Summit Day, because when I saw the posts of what Summit Day looked like for you guys, I will tell you it certainly did not meet the expectations that I had for, even with it being a mountain and being very up high. I'm like, well, shit, you're still in Africa. Like what? But you guys had a day
Yes.
getting up to the
Well,
summit.
that was not how I pictured us looking at the summit either, but it was our reality, as Danny said. So it takes basically 5 hiking days to get up to base camp. And then from base camp, you basically summit. You go to the very top of Mount Kilimanjaro, which is 19,348 feet. And then you go back down, and all in the same, not all the way down to where you started from, but back to base camp. So you do that all in one day, plus a little extra because you have to go to the next camp to spend the night. So most guide companies start where to get to the summit, they wake you up and you start at midnight.
Woo.
So yeah, you basically take a little nap beforehand.
Yeah.
And then you get a little snack, you pack up, you put on all the layers, because obviously when you're going in the pitch black, it's dark and it's cold because of the altitude. And so you layer all up, and then you start your climb. Usually 6 to 8 hours. It's really lengthwise, as distance is only a 5K, so like 3.2 miles.
Right.
But you're going up, I think it was like 4,800 feet of elevation in that time period. So it's just a lot of like really high incline that you're doing, as you know. And the thing that I was very focused in on the summit day, because it's going to be a hard day. Like you don't normally hike in the dark. Who would? Why? And then second of all, I mean, just the physical toll that takes on you. And do I have enough to make it up to the top? Like altitude sickness, what's going to happen? Those were the things I was focusing on. And I had never really thought or visualized. I'd visualized a lot of like, oh, I'm going to go to the top and I'm going to see the sunrise. Because that's one of the other goals of getting up at midnight, is that, you know, in about 6 hours, you probably get to see that sunrise as you're approaching the summit, which, you know, I had painted this beautiful movie picture of that.
Right. Yeah. Very Lion King-esque.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. And it was not that. Leading up to it, I also didn't think about how am I going to feel before we even get there, because I've spent 5 days on a mountain. And starting, I think, on day 4, we started to get some pretty nasty winds. And it was the type of wind that feels like it's literally blowing you over. Like you're
Gale
just having
force.
to hold on for dear life and just put your head down, because if you put it up, it's just you're gonna get a pretty intense facial with the sand that's hitting you on the face and everything. So that did not lend well to sleeping.
No, I would imagine not.
No. I'm sure Danny might be sharing a story about a tent collapse, but we had that. And then, you know, the next day, and when we got to base camp, it did not ever let up. It just continued at that pace of windiness. And I was over it. Like I was like, I am so done with this. Like you could find no place to get true rest. It's not like you could go into a home and be like, oh, I'm so glad to be out of the wind.
Right.
You had no place like that. And it just was very mentally wearing on me. And I knew I would have a mental game to play in this. And people had talked about it. And then I experienced like, oh, this is what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And we just, you know, sleep was not there, and you're laying in your tent and it's literally sounds like your tent's about ready to fall over every minute. So that's not restful.
No. Yeah.
And then I'm supposed to be doing this hardest thing physically that I've probably ever done. And so I had to really, I guess I shared with the team too. I was like, I had in my mind, it was going to look a certain way. Like Danny even just talked about expectations. I had and it's not. And so now it's freaking me out, because I needed it to be this way so that I could even make it up to the top.
Right.
And so it's that whole visualization of, I heard a really good podcast actually afterwards, after the climb, from Mel Robbins. And she's like, visualization and manifestation should also include some of the realities, like, hey, if you're going to train for a marathon, you might want to visualize running in the rain, or when that alarm goes off at 5 a.m. or when you've got a blister on your foot. Like we all visualize, like I just told you, I visualized the moment, you know, where like, here's the sunrise and I'm seeing it and you know, I have tears of joy.
Right.
I still had tears of joy, but one, they were frozen because it was so cold. And, but also, you know, you just don't think about all of those hiccups along the way, and it's not going to look perfect. I wanted it to, and that's how I had pictured it in my mind. And also, as Danny said, I'd watched a lot of videos of other people, so I knew what their experience was like. So I kind of figured, well, that's what mine's going to look like too. But no, that wasn't the journey for us. So just having to work through that and knowing too in business, like you have it in a certain thing in your mind of this is how it's going to work out. Maybe you get an attraction and you're just like, oh, this is what it's going to do. This is how much money I'm going to make. Bingo, bango, let's do it.
Right.
And then you're super disappointed when you don't see that right away, or it doesn't work out quite that way and you got to move it to a different location, or you got to make tweaks to it, and or maybe the install is a little wonky.
Right.
I just feel like sometimes we set ourselves up for disappointment because we're not thinking about, you know what, this is life. It's not going to be perfect.
Well, and if the game plan is developed in the lab, as soon as you get it out into the wild, the environment still gets to have a say.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. and so we'll share a picture for those of you watching the video version. And if you're not watching the video version, I always highly encourage you to do so. But I mean, that picture, one of all of you guys bundled up in probably every single layer that you guys brought with you. But
almost, yes.
Literally seeing icicles off to the side with the amount of wind and everything that you guys had. And when you guys came back and told me what Abu had mentioned to you guys is as far as this was probably the worst weather he had ever seen in the hundreds of summits that he had done. And I'm like, well, I don't know if that's the merit badge that anybody really hopes to get, but at least, you know, if you're going through the suck and you're digging it out, like at least you get to pin that, you know, that little extra winner's badge on you for that, because it's incredible and such a beautiful picture too. But I love that idea of, when we do, especially from high achievers and things, it's so easy to get focused on what that outcome is, okay, but we don't take the typically the amount of time to really peel back the layers of the onion of what the hardships and the struggles and things go through. And we want to manifest success and we want to visualize ourselves winning and succeeding. But how important that is, to your point of what Mel Robbins was talking about as well, of you should be seeing yourself going through the hardships, and so that way you can be not completely disenfranchised when they happen.
Right. And if it were easy, everyone would do it.
Right.
So there is that too. And just knowing, like, when we got to the top, I know another piece that I was kind of disappointed in, but I was elated that I made it to summit. So that was that. I think it was clouded by that, but and that's kind of ironic I said clouded, but we couldn't see anything. Nothing. It was like just a gray fog around everything, so we had no idea how high we were, where we were at. It was just snow on the ground and fog, but still did not damper how excited I was that I'd met the goal. And you know, it's really about the journey, not just the summit part, but it was the journey getting up there. We'd spent a lot of time on this.
Well, that one thing as well, it was also to me when you guys were talking about, you know, hey, we got up to the summit. Now we still have to get down. So, you know, it's so easy in your mind of like, I have this goal, I want to, you know, when most people say I want to climb this mountain, really what's going on in their head is I want to get to the top of this mountain, but there's always more to do after you get to the top of that. So you guys had quite the trek then to get back down. And by the way, doing that all in a day and change, you know, of what took you 6 days to do, you were doing in a day and a half to come all the way back down, and still going through the exhaustion, still going through all of the push that it takes to get all of that. But that is not the finish line in many situations. And so I was also, you know, really enjoyed getting to hear a little bit about what both of you guys had from that experience as well. Danny, did you have any thoughts on that?
Well, so yes, I have lots of thoughts on that. I'm trying to figure out which one I want to share first. Well, let me just do this. I'll go back because Kim had alluded to this.
Yes.
On day 4, the winds that picked up.
Yes.
And so I wanted to share a story because I think this is a good example of when things don't go according to plan. So it was in the late afternoon, evening on day 4 when it really, really picked up with the wind. And so after dinner, we all lay down to sleep or attempt to sleep because the wind was so unbelievably loud. And I had been laying in my tent, and I probably slept maybe an hour, and then I woke up to this noise that I didn't know what it was at first. And when I'm laying in the tent, that night was a clear night, and we had almost a full moon at that point. So it wasn't pitch black outside. I could see the outline of our tent in the moonlight, and I saw that our rain fly in the tent was flapping around in the wind. And I thought, oh crap, one of the tent stakes came out. And so both Michelle and I got up because we wanted to go around and take a look at what was going on to fix the problem. So we got out of the tent, and this was about 10:30 at night. We went around to the other side and looked down, and it wasn't that the stake had come out. It did, but the rain fly ripped from the base of the tent all the way to the top, and that's why it was flapping in the wind. And we were just sitting there looking at it going, now what? What do we do with this? Everyone was asleep at that point, all the guides, all the porters, everybody else. And while we're trying to figure out what to do next, the wind was so strong that it flipped our entire tent over. And I had to hold on to it to keep it from flying away. And then we started just yelling for our guides, Abu, Lulu, help. And so some of the porters had come out of their tents and came over. And really, there was only one solution to do at that moment, which was take all of our stuff out of the tent, literally throw it in Kim's tent when Katie, who she was tent mates with, collapse our tent, and then bunk up that night 4 in a row, side by side, like sardines.
Yeah.
And so we're all laying in there, and I didn't get any more sleep that night because I was laying there, hearing the wind, thinking, oh my gosh, what's going to happen if this tent rips? What are we going to do then? We don't have backup tents. What's going to... And my mind was going in this spiral of all the things, and I was focused on all the bad things that were happening or that I was labeling as bad and why they shouldn't be happening. And I remembered in that moment something that I like to refer to as the good old days paradox, where we can look at the past, at a season in life or a specific obstacle that in the moment when we were doing it, it was really, really hard and we didn't like it. But looking back on it now, we can look back on it fondly, almost with some nostalgia. And I was thinking to myself, okay, Danny, you're going to laugh about this one day. You're going to laugh about this one day. And I was trying to detach myself from the expectations of what I thought my night should be. And it was hard, and I was not super successful because I would love to say, oh, I said that to myself, I was at peace, and I rested the rest of the night. That didn't happen at all. But I was working through in that moment to try to get myself to a better mental place. And I think that's important because when we hit challenges, when we hit roadblocks, when we hit things that are unexpected that we don't want to happen, how do we respond to that? And the way that we respond informs how we can move forward. It informs how successful we are. It informs how happy we're going to be through challenges. And so that, I think, was a really important lesson and a reminder that things are going to go wrong and you've got to figure out a way through it.
Yeah. Ooh. Well, so as you go through those struggles, and I remember this from when I used to do marathons and half marathons, humble brag, just because I'm feeling insecure with these mountain climbers, was one of the things was when I was going through that experience, would get rain that turned to sleet, that turned to hail, that turned to snow, that turned back to sleet. My knee was hurting, all of that, and I was like, how do I keep going with this? And the one thing that I had to keep telling myself was, my legs still work. My legs still work. I can go forward. What were some of the things that you guys had to kind of put in your mind to just keep going at times? I mean, I'm sure that you had those experiences, especially going through after the tent has collapsed and now we're, packed like sardines within the tent. It's exhaustion, it's lack of sleep, and all of those things. Like, what were the mantras or the encouragement that you had to give yourself over and over again as you guys were climbing?
Yeah, I actually stole some from Michelle, but one of my big ones was just take the next step, just next step. And I really had to use that a lot on summit day, especially as we were starting, because it was kind of once we got into a little bit of a flow with it, and kind of really got, because we kind of had to scale a little bit of a rock face, and then we got to kind of really just start the churn and burn of getting up there. all you could really see was just like this line of headlamps all the way up to the top. And you're just like, oh gosh. And that wasn't even the top. That was just the top of where you were at there. And then you'd have a new top and all that. But if I wasn't kind of focused in on just saying those mantras, I definitely could get in a bad headspace of like, oh, everyone, because I was right behind the guy to boo. So I was number 2 in our lineup, so to speak. So I felt I'd put unneeded pressure on myself, thinking that, oh, everyone's so mad at me because I'm going so slow. But they weren't. That was all head trash, as you said. But once I focused in on, you know, I'm capable, I am prepared, I am strong, next step, you know, saying those things over and over again, that power of affirmation. I know some people, you know, all they can think of is that silly SNL skit, you know, I'm strong, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me. Yes. No, it wasn't that. It was just power statements for myself and just keeping my brain focused on that. It's just like you just mentioned about, you're like, my knee works. I can do this. Yeah. And it's keeping your mind in check, because it can go in all sorts of crazy places, especially when you put it in those kind of environments where it's very volatile. It's something you've never done before. Right. You're kind of uncertain to your abilities I mean, even though we'd all train fairly well for the last almost year, but just that power of mantra, really, I noticed a marked difference when I was focused on my mantra versus just being still and quiet, and then my brain would go in some pretty funky places. So
such a good lesson in just the power of words that you and how you
talk to yourself. Yes.
Man. Danny, anything from you on that front?
I echo what Kim said. You know, those words were super important for all of us. And I had a mantra I said to myself probably over 1,000 times on summit day, getting to the top. And I also felt the difference, because between when I had that mantra and affirmations going and when the mind gremlins would creep in of like, you're too tired, you can't make it, I could feel my body slow down in those moments. And what was interesting is that after we did summit and we were talking about that experience, we all had moments, or many, many moments, like me, where we thought to ourselves, I don't know if I'm going to make it. I don't think I can do this. But we never said that to each other, which I think was really crucial. We just stayed, and we just had to dig deep to do whatever we could to keep going, because on top of the weather conditions and on top of cold and ice and wind and all those things, there was that lack of sleep where, you know, the day 6 is the day we summited. Well, nights 4 and 5 combined, I probably slept 2 hours. And so the amount of exhaustion that my body was feeling on the way up, I got to the point where thinking affirmations to myself wasn't enough. I had to talk to myself out loud in order to stay focused and stay awake. And no one else could hear me because of the amount of wind, single file line, all that stuff. It didn't really matter. I was just doing whatever it took to put one foot in front of the next.
Oh man, that's some good focus and determination right there, guys. I appreciate that.
It's a little grit you have to put in there too. I mean, as with anything in life, but yes, we definitely had to just kind of push through. And I know we got up to a certain point, and Danny might be able to help me remember. I think it was Kit's Point, or
Stella Point.
Stella Point. Thank you. I'm not sure where Kit came from. Anyway, Stella Point, and we stopped and they gave us some hot tea as we tried to literally everything was crusty on us from ice that had formed. And we're trying to drink this hot tea, and I was just expecting, if I asked how much longer, he was going to say 5 hours.
Right.
And he said about 45 minutes. And I was like, I can do this. I got this. I can do this. 45 minutes. I could do something in 45 minutes. But it's amazing how your brain I was already preparing myself to oh, he's going to say something that's still so hard. Cause you just kind of feel beat down and such, but having those little moments of okay,
yes,
grit, I can do it. Let's go.
I love that. Last question before we wrap up a little bit. So Danny, you when you got to the summit, obviously, you know, I'm sure tears of joy, just like Kim had as well, because that's such an emotional experience and such an accomplishment. What is the best mountain summit experience that you've ever had?
Well, so I think that people will ask that, like, oh, was this one the best? Was it magical? Was this amazing moment? And I'll get to that in just a second. And I think a preface is important. You know, one of the things that we had talked about is being present every single day and not allowing ourselves to talk or think about a day other than the one that we were on. If it's day 2, don't talk about summit day. Don't talk about the last day. Don't talk about tomorrow. It's just here and now. And that was our emphasis on staying present. You know, we all knew that summit was the goal. Summit was coming. It was going to happen. But we didn't want to miss out on all the stuff happening here and now in the moment. And to me, the value of this practice became crystal clear the moment that we got to the summit. Because as much as it was a relief and as proud as I was of myself to get there, it was also anticlimactic. And here's what I mean by that is, number one, you know, people think about a mountain summit and they think about going up, 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 and there's this one point much higher than everything else that you're all going toward. And when you stand on the top, you look around, and you're like, I've made it. Kilimanjaro is a little bit different, where the top of the mountain is kind of like a flatter plateau. It takes a ton of work to get up there. But once you hit Stella Point, as Kim referred to, once you're there, you're going to summit. Because from there to the actual summit is probably only 50 feet of elevation gain, but you have to walk around part of the crater at the top, the crater rim at the top of the mountain. And so it takes 45 minutes to walk around there. And so you're just kind of hiking on a more or less flat area, and then you see the sign ahead of you that's probably, you know, 3 feet taller than you are right now, 100 feet away. You're like, there it is. And then we get there, and then everything's foggy and everything's covered in ice. And then we spent 15 minutes, and then we turned back around and went down. And so it was a very short-lived win. And if we spent the entire trek, all 6 days leading up to that point, only thinking about the summit, what would that have felt like after moving on after 15 minutes? It probably would have been a huge letdown. Yet, we do this all the time with our goals in life. We focus so much on the next achievement, the next goal, the next milestone, that we miss all of the joy and the fulfillment here and right now. And then when we do achieve that goal, it feels good for a little bit, maybe a week, maybe a day, maybe less if we're being quite honest. And then we move on. But real joy and fulfillment is in the moment. It's in the process. It's working through it every day, day in, day out, day in, day out. And that's what we experienced on the mountain. We fell in love with the process and staying present. And that allowed us to find joy and fulfillment in the big and small wins along the way that we would not have recognized and we would not have noticed if the only thing that we cared about was the summit.
Man.
Well said.
Yeah,
Very
I think
good.
that puts us at a great wrapping point. And one, I just want to tell both of you how appreciative I am that you guys took on this amazing challenge. It's I've been inspired every time that we talk about you know, the hardships that you guys had to go through, and I'm so grateful to have such badasses in my life. So thank you guys both very
Likewise.
much for doing that.
Marathon runner.
Well, that was you know.
Own your greatness.
Thank you. Yes, appreciate you. Well, thank you guys so much. I think that's where we're going to wrap things up today. If you guys have any thoughts or comments or challenges that you guys have taken on, and you'd love to share those with us, we'd love to hear from you about those. So please drop those into the comments of the episode, and we'll also, you know, kind of recap and share some of those takeaways as well, because we know that a lot of you listening are really good at taking on hard things and being accomplished people, and so we're grateful for you as well. So, Danny, anything else before we wrap up, good sir?
No, as always, if you liked what you heard, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review.
And we always appreciate those 5 stars. Please and thank you.
If you've got ideas for future episodes, we're sending them out weekly. So if you got ideas for future episodes, topics, or guests, follow us on social media and send us a DM.
Awesome. And as always, big shout out to Mikey Mike on the ones and twos, working the Ultranet back there. And thank you all for joining us, and we will catch you on the next one, Troublemakers.